Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. This video is going to be all about helping you identify potential data collection methods, which is what we're working on in week 1. And I know that there's a lot to cover in this week, but this is a really critical step of your alpha test. So I wanted to give you a little bit of help and look through some of these resources that we have to consider. So the first thing I wanted to take a look at is the textbook for the course. And there's a lot of great information the first 4 chapters, but I wanted to skip right ahead to chapter 5 so that we can look at some of the components relevant to developing a test plan. And I definitely recommend that you read all of the beginning information, but I'm going to skip ahead to the parts of the test plan so that we can talk about that more specifically. And one of the recommendations of the text is before you select any methods, you want to first get clear on exactly what you hope to gain from your alpha test. And there's some great question prompts in this area to help you get thinking about what you need relevant to your prototype and making the necessary improvements. So there are some guidelines that follow on developing your research questions. And it's likely that you may have one or you may have more than one research question. And the textbook offers some wonderful examples of unfocused and ineffective research questions versus a list of examples of really specific effective research questions. And you can see that they vary based on product type. There is also a section for general research questions. And I think that you'll find that this is a wonderful guide, whether you find a question that happens to fit perfectly, or more likely you might use one of these examples as a guide to help you identify a more specific research question based on the information you hope to elicit about your prototype. So as we scroll down, there's some information on participants, but we know in this class that your test users are going to be your classmates. And there are some design methods that are described, and I wanted to talk about a couple of quick things before we get into these. When you're writing your design method, which is what you'll be adding to your template this week, a good rule of thumb is to make sure that you're including enough detail so that someone else reading your work would be able to replicate an exact or an identical alpha test in the exact fashion. So with that in mind, you'll want your description to be orderly, sequential, clear, and succinct, but also provide enough details for someone to replicate the test. The other word of caution that I wanted to give to you is that you're going to notice some of these research as we look at these research designs, some of them just won't be feasible because of the limited number of users you have and so on and so forth. But that's perfectly fine because there are often constraints in the real world as well. So it's great practice for that. However, I still think it's important that you familiarize yourself with all of these design strategies so that you'll be familiar with them for future use when you're working in the real world. So this first research design is independent groups design or between subjects design. And as you can see here, essentially what we have are a group of users testing one component of the product. And while this is wonderful, it probably won't be feasible for you because then you would only have one person's perspective on half of your product, while you have only one person's perspective on the other half of your product. So I don't think that that would work particularly well for this class, whereas the within subjects design might be something that fits with this class a little bit better. And this is where each user or tester explores each component of the product. And there are variations with this, such as jumbling the task sequence. And the only consideration with this is that if you happen to have let's say a training, for example, in which content, information, or knowledge that was gained in module 1 must be obtained to complete subsequent modules, that might not work well, but you know the product that you've developed, so you'll be able to determine if that might be appropriate for you. We also have testing multiple product versions But again, knowing that most of you probably have a single prototype as opposed to being in a position of wanting to compare, this one might not be of interest to you. And then we have testing multiple user groups. And because we know that your classmates are going to be your testers, this probably wouldn't fit as well. But in other situations, this can yield some really interesting data looking at different group characteristics and how they interact with a product. So now I wanted to go back to our classroom and look at some of the resources in our week 1 instructor guidance. And so I'm going to click on week 1 instructor guide. And this is all great information. I definitely recommend that you're reading it. I'm only scrolling past that we can look at some specific information. Down here in the elaboration section, I wanted to pull up the UX research cheat sheet. And as we look at the infographic that we have here, I did want to point out that being that you already have a prototype developed at this point, you're probably past the discover and the explore stage and would be looking more at the test and listen phase. And previously, when we were looking at the textbook, we talked about identifying the design of your alpha test. And here you start to see some examples of data collection methods. So surveys might be something that jumps out to you. And if you scroll down further, you'll see there's a list here as well as some more detailed information. Here we are in the test section and the listen section. So keep in mind that you'll definitely want to explore these methods further before you commit to using any specific method. For example, one of the methods that you might have seen me scroll past would be the survey. This is a term that's probably recognizable to you, yet there might be some other methods of data collection that are new that you're not familiar with. So again, just don't shy away from exploring those a little bit further to see if it was something that might be of interest to you. Now I'm going to navigate back to the classroom and open up this other resource here. This is a great article, but I wanted to focus on some of the research methods you're going to find here. So along with your research questions, I think that this resource is particularly helpful with identifying the type of data collection methods that you're going to use. And while I definitely recommend reading through and getting a better sense of, what you're looking at on this page, I wanted to scroll down to the infographic to help guide you a little bit with your research methods. Or your alpha testing methods, sorry. So when you think back about the research questions that you had landed on with respect to your prototype, were you asking why or how, or were you asking how many or how much? If your research questions tended to ask why or how, you're going to want to select a qualitative research method or data collection method. So with qualitative methods, you'd be looking for your test users' impressions, opinions, and their perspectives. And some examples of qualitative data collection methods might be, and these are the ones that would be interesting to you, would be possibly interview with participants. You might have a data collection method utilizing a survey with open-ended question prompts, or possibly a narrated observation. And one of the methods identified on this page is the moderated remote usability study, which is really kind of an interesting approach. And I mentioned that in the announcement and recommended the Screencast-O-Matic tool if that's something that you're interested in. Conversely, if your research questions ask how many or how much, you're going to want to select a quantitative research method or alpha testing method. And with quantitative methods, you're looking for numbers and statistics, so kind of hard data. And you might use a questionnaire here, but remember that you want to yield results. So a questionnaire or a Likert survey where people, your users would rate things on a scale of 1 to 5 or something like that. You might also utilize data analytics, within the system where your prototype is housed. So for example, a lot of learning management systems offer data analytics with respect to pages viewed, time spent on pages, things of that nature. So if that relates to what you're looking for with your research questions, then that might be something that works really well for you. So if you scroll down a bit further, kind of moving past these things quickly, but down here in the methods in brief, you have a nice list of some data collection methods in a short description. Some of them have links as well. And I just wanted to kind of walk through a couple of these or talk about them very briefly. So when you look at these different data collection methods, just like with some of the research designs that we looked at from the textbook, some of those might not be feasible within the constraints of the class, and that's true for your data collection methods as well. So keep in mind that your alpha testing is going to be completed by 2 of your classmates within the course of 1 week. So you really need to create a balance of creating an alpha test that's going to yield meaningful and insightful information, but yet that's not too cumbersome that your classmates won't be able to get that done for you. So for example, focus group, this might be a little bit difficult, maybe not ideal because you only have 2 participants and it might be difficult to coordinate that focus group. It's possible though. An interview might be something you're leaning toward. This is a pretty common approach, and this would be a good method to obtain qualitative data. So eye tracking would probably be another example, although really interesting. Eye tracking would be an example of a data collection method you probably don't have access to because you wouldn't have access to the software needed to track a user's eyes on a page. Unless you might be able to find a tool out there online, which is part of this process as well, is identifying tools that can deliver your data collection instrument. So I mentioned moderated remote usability study, and this was the one I had mentioned. You can actually use Screencast-O-Matic. So I'll explain this a little bit more during the class and we can talk about this. This might be a great option. Email surveys are also something you see on here as well. But remember, the important consideration is that you're aligning your data collection methods with the research questions you want to answer. So your qualitative, open-ended methods are going to answer why and how, and you're going to be receiving words as a response. So written responses, verbal responses, whereas with quantitative methods, these are going to yield numbers such as ratings or occurrences, things of that nature, and those types of data collection methods would answer how many or how much. So I hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions, certainly don't hesitate to reach out. This is a really critical part of your alpha test, making sure that you have the correct alpha testing data collection methods to gain insightful information about your prototype. So I hope you're excited. And again, any questions, definitely reach out. Thank you.